Mr. Schwarzman, as you say in your book, you've been through 7 major crises, 7 major market recessions, from the early 70s to the latest one in 2010. We all know that the markets are cyclical. And today we see a lot of signs that potentially another crisis is coming. What do you think is the key challenge that you see in the global economy today?
Well, there are a lot of challenges. We have a slowing economy globally. We have a very rapidly slowing manufacturing sector everywhere in the world. And we also have interest rates that are as low as they have been in my lifetime. And in Europe, there are $13 trillion of bonds trading at a negative yield. So this is all signifying that it's time to be alert, because it's not quite business as usual. On the other hand, in the United States, for example, where manufacturing is only 11% of our economy, 70% is consumer. And the consumers are doing really well. We have full employment, the most robust employment since 1969. We're sort of slowly running out of workers, which has led to wages going up significantly more than inflation. And what happens when 70% of your population is now getting wage increases significantly more than inflation? They spend that money, and which then creates a positive type of momentum for the economy. So the U.S., for example, will do pretty well unless people lose confidence. And they don't normally lose confidence because of an economic cycle per se. They lose confidence for other reasons, whether we have a political crisis in the United States or there's a geopolitical crisis around the world. Those are the kind of things that I think one has to look out for.
So how would one prepare for these challenges? I mean, you've been a very successful investor by noticing and acting very quickly on the early signs
Yes.
of a crisis. I mean, I remember in your book talking about the real estate company that you bought in 2006, one of the largest buyout ever, and seeing the signs, you de-risked the deal very quickly.
Yes.
Before the crisis started. So how should one prepare for these challenges that you see at the moment?
Well, this is sort of slow motion at the moment. We haven't had credit really seize up, which is usually when the patient starts evidencing it's really getting sick. I think it's a time for some caution. In the private markets, which you teach, we still can find interesting things, but we have to work a lot harder. That because of higher prices caused by low interest rates, instead of having 20 things to look at, maybe there are 4 that we can get to the end on. So because we don't need to be fully invested at all times, unlike liquid managers, we're lucky. We're like a basketball team that only shoots when we have an open shot. And we don't have a shot clock that forces us to shoot. So we keep passing the ball around, looking for an easy shot. There are fewer easy shots, but there's still some easy shots. We just don't buy things. We're not liquid investors. We don't have to be invested. And in fact, in 2006, we cut our investment rate by about 75% because we sensed that something was about to go wrong. Here it's, for the most part, soggy. It doesn't feel crisis.
Yes.
It just feels soggy.
You see the very early signs, but not the critical ones yet.
Yes, that's right.
When I teach my students in the class, I show them a very interesting graph. And that graph shows the number of companies that are in the portfolios of private equity funds and the number of companies that are publicly listed in the United States. Now, these 2 graphs intersected at some point in 2007, but now we have about 8,000 companies that are owned by private equity funds and only 3,400 or something like that publicly listed companies in the United States. So there's a clear trend towards private markets. Do you think that private markets are better able to withstand a crisis?
Yeah, I think what we saw last time in the worst crisis, which I definitely do not anticipate seeing again because of a lot of changes, that private markets did fine. There were no more insolvencies as a percentage, as less leveraged companies. So I don't look to private markets to create systemic risk. I think the reason for the difference is that a medium-sized to small private company really has difficulty being public. It's expensive,
Yes.
and the liquidity is low, and there were a variety of regulatory changes after the crisis to make it really unappealing for those companies to be public. For example, in New York State, they basically took away the ability for analysts to cover these type of companies if you did any other work for the business. And it basically, I thought, and told people at that time, would result in people not wanting to be public. And, as usual, the politicians sort of thought I was, not me in particular, but sort of like trying to defend the indefensible. So what they got is the statistics
Exactly.
that you're talking about. Because if you make life very difficult for somebody, they find another place to go.
I mean, to some extent, they do have access to longer-term capital now,
Yeah.
maybe because of the private equity funds that are out there, right?
Yeah, well, that's a good thing for them.
Yes.
And it's good to be able to grow at a faster rate. So it would be interesting for you to take a look at these companies to the extent that you can get the data to see who's growing the fastest. Is it a public company that's comparably sized? And I don't think there'll be that many of them. Or is it a private sector?
I've done one of those studies myself here in Europe, and the data clearly indicates that companies under private equity ownership grow faster, invest more, and they have better profitability margins. It's very difficult to find private company data in the United States. It's impossible, but here we have data on private companies.
Well, this is great because there's all kinds of misunderstandings about the private equity industry. This is our experience at Blackstone as well, and it's important that actually facts are used instead of people's guesswork.
Absolutely agree. One last question, and probably you get this question quite often. What keeps you up at night? What is the one key risk that you see with Blackstone?
Well, I'm usually up at night anyhow. I don't sleep that much, and the biggest risk is political.
Okay.
It's not business risk.
Okay.
Business risk we know how to handle and have been through a lot of cycles. Political risk is when sort of a country decides it's going to go off in an unprecedented direction and change its fundamental views and indulge in approaches that have failed in other countries because this time it's different. That's my biggest concern.
And obviously it's a risk that is very difficult to control.
That's difficult to control.
Thank you very much for your time.
And congratulations on all the terrific work you do.
Thank you. Thank you for your time.